I've been working a lot in B2B marketing, but I also work very much in B2C, where you really need to engage with your customer and be emotional connected to build brand loyalty. But that goes equally for B2B, and I think that is important. And for example, when we talked a lot about T.Loop and why it's so important to do heat reuse, I always start with the figure 460 terawatt of hours that we waste every year, which is worth 50 to 100 billion euros wasted every year, equivalent to heating up 37 cities size of Stockholm. So I think just by bringing in the numbers and understand also the magnitude of both the problem, but also the potential in it, because this is something also we often forget. Hi, I'm Cecilia Hjertzell. I'm Chief Sustainability and Marketing Officer at T.Loop, and I'm so happy to be on the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast again.
Hi, it's Joshua Feinberg from the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast, and I'm thrilled to welcome our first repeat guest from the podcast. I'm welcoming back Cecilia Hjertzell, who is the Chief Marketing and Sustainability Officer at T.Loop in Sweden. Cecilia, welcome back.
Thank you so much, and I feel honored to be back on the show again.
It's my honor as well. So, in the months since we last spoke, you've been working on a really interesting initiative adjacent to the work that you're doing with T.Loop. I'm really curious if you can walk me through what was the path that led you to think about this new launch.
Well, as I think we talked a lot about that T.Loop is aiming to do is actually using the untapped assets that normally sits in the data center. That means the rest heat. So we do heat recovery. And then we also have the gen set. We have a lot of power capacity if something goes wrong and goes down. And that we could actually use for grid balancing and supporting the energy net. And so also giving back and using untapped assets, that's key for T.Loop in us building this circular business model. And trying to find a solution how to do the net balancing and the grid balancing. The tech team was looking around to find a partner or somebody who actually could offer a solution for it. But they couldn't find it that was actually suitable for data centers. And since we are a company of entrepreneurs, Staffan Stumne and Mattias Lindqvist, who are the co-founders of T.Loop, they actually looked for partners and found good partners in software and hardware engineering for data centers in a company called Matic here in Sweden. But talking to them, they realized that the potential is actually not just helping T.Loop to support or open up and use the genset to support the energy net. This could actually be used and offered to other data centers as well. So they both saw the business potential, but also to scale the opportunity from a circular energy perspective. So that was the main driver behind it. And they started, it's a joint venture company with this other Swedish company. And we've been working shoulder to shoulder and building this solution that was actually launched in beginning of December last year under its own brand. So it's called TSO Link or TSO Link. Of course, referring back to the TSO, it sits in every country. And now it's official. And it was quite cool as well. We know that there's a lot of others who's been working on the same solution, but we are the first movers.
So that's really exciting. So this was a gap that you saw that you were looking for a solution for, and you found this, and then you realized that the company that had developed this didn't even realize that this was an application that they could be accelerating, bringing to market as well.
No, we actually developed it together. So it's a co-design. I mean, we couldn't. They needed the competence that we have in the company, and so it was the perfect match. It was just like a marriage, which is the best for a good working joint venture when you really bring two essential competences to the table.
So from purely a go-to-market perspective, this all of a sudden takes T.Loop, where it has facilities in Sweden, to being able to have something that can be utilized across Europe and globally.
Yes, and it also brings us into a new segment, because this is like hardware and software solutions, while we normally build and operate data centers. So it is another type of product in the portfolio, so to speak. But it's also so that T.Loop, we are the first customers as well to TSO Link, which is really good. So we, in that sense, also can guarantee the quality of the service.
And it's the overused American expression of eating our own dog food, drinking our own champagne, being our own best case study. But yeah, there's something for sure to be said for being able to demonstrate value and then using that case study, using that value to entice other operators, all different sizes, all different regions.
But what I think also, I mean, as we say, T.Loop is an impact company, and we are striving to change the industry. We really want data centers to be a center part of solving the energy transition and being part of a more sustainable future in that sense. And for us, if we can help other data centers to bring their genset also to the net, I mean, that it's so much capacity that sits in every data center that can be better utilized. And it's not just that they're sort of giving it, they're actually earning money for it. I mean, that could differ in some markets where there are really big problems with power constraints. This is a good revenue stream. So I think it's important to see that also in the circular business model, because sometimes you talk about impact business models as if you're earning less money. But this is actually just a different thinking. It's a new approach, and just seeing it as a T-Loop. I mean, this was an important part of, or piece in the puzzle for us, to make sure that we can have 3 revenue streams instead of just one. So we have the colocation services, but we also earn money on the heat, and now we do it also on the genset, which normally is just a cost. So it is, and I think that is also something really important to focus on, that circle business models, they are also good money.
For sure. So in addition to all the expertise that you're gaining from being in the co-location business and the heat reuse, you're showing how you can run a more efficient co-location business, and you can use this device as a launching pad to demonstrate the value to really one of the most important stakeholders, is community leaders who need to make development decisions, zoning decisions, location decisions that would make this a favorable model in different regions.
And that also makes, I mean, going forward, I mean, especially here in Europe, I mean, we have this whole Green Deal, which we talked a lot about before, that regulates, I mean, that is us aiming for being climate neutral in 2055 and reducing the CO2 emissions by half to 2030. And I mean, that is a transformation ongoing in Europe. And that means also that investments are steered towards the businesses that can show that they are really delivering on environmental, social, and governance targets. And of course, that means that it's probably easier for data center operator to get investments and funding and find good financial models if you can show that you also have if you are more sustainable. So it's not just something that sits on your brand or a report. This is business strategy.
So are there applications for this beyond companies right now that are committed to heat reuse, or do they have to have proximity to adjacent sites where they're already heavily bought in, heavily invested into heat reuse as a core part of their model?
I mean, more or less every data center have spare capacity to start with batteries or generators to start if something goes wrong with the electricity net. And normally they are, especially if you're in a stable electricity region, you very rarely use them. I mean, more less 99.9% of the time the electricity grid works. So perhaps you start them just to make sure that they work. So you have, or most of data centers operators, they have already invested in this. This is something you already have in your data center, but it sits unused, and so to speak, is an untapped asset. And what we do is, by providing them a solution through TSO Link, they can make their already existing assets to support the net grid, and but still guarantee the uptime for their colocation customers, because that was the key. This was something we needed to solve. I mean, we can't give back to the grid and suddenly we lose the power in the data center, because we always need to support the IT customers first, so they can be 100% sure that if something goes wrong, we always look after their servers first. So this is what the whole software and hardware challenge was to solve, to make sure to have a solution that works for data centers, so the SLAs and the uptime is always guaranteed towards the customers. And this is what we've sold.
So there could be an interesting application as well, too, for some companies heavily invested in backup and disaster recovery and has struggled to make the financial investment for enough backup and disaster recovery. And this is a way for them to potentially get some financial return from that for the nearly every day of the year where they don't need that extra capacity.
Exactly. And I mean, is it something the whole debate about our industry that came with AI was that suddenly we were using so much of the power. And I think it's so important that if we can start giving back as well and be part of the solution on energy, that would completely change the how our industry is perceived. And I think that is important as well, to say that we're not just takers, we're also giving back. And we're not just creating problems, we also are a very strong part of the solution. So I think this is also important, because we need data centers, as we all know. I mean, we are the infrastructure for the digitalization, and we want that to continue. But we don't want to end up in a situation when there's no more power, and where we have to choose which type of digital solutions can we actually deploy.
So from a go-to-market perspective, you have these three different lines of business. Clearly, the colocation and the heat reuse is very localized, although for sure there can be companies that specifically want proximity and an edge location in Stockholm. But the go-to-market for TSO Link would be completely different. When you think about like the geographic areas, the company sizes, specific industries, like at a company level, before we get into individual stakeholders, how do you think about that as you're building out and documenting like a ICP or thinking about like a target account list?
I think especially where we are at the moment, I mean, we're now trying it out for T.Loop itself and make sure that the product is stable. But meanwhile, we can also, of course, start the customer dialogues. And I think today, it's a little bit changed the landscape, how you go to market. I mean, before you were always talking about like, okay, first we address this market, we start with the home market and so on. But today, I think also our industry is more leaning towards the business models that has been in the digital, in the tech industry for quite a long time, especially if you launch applications that you more or less just follow the customers. You start off and then you see, okay, here, this was the region area where they were shown great interest, and then you can start from there and so on. So I don't personally believe that you always need to go to follow this strict, like first we go to this one and then we go, since we are in Sweden, then we go to Denmark, and then after Denmark comes Germany and so on, the traditional map, so to speak. I think here it's much more interesting to see how is the industry in that country, what is the discussion about it, is there an openness for these type of questions, is it important, is it driven by regulations. The energy efficiency directive that we have now from EU has been implemented in different ways, because that is how it works also from EU. You first get like a common directive, but then you can make adjustments, local adjustments on a national level. So, I mean, if you are in a country that is focusing very hard on that, like in Germany, for example, they were very quick to set fixed levels on what is a sustainable data center and so on, while other markets haven't done it so far. That could also indicate where will this be even more important for an industry player.
So a lot of the strongest demand could be seen by where there's directives, regulatory issues that are encouraging sustainability, which is a big part of the European Union, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That in combination also with power constraints. Where do you have, in which market do you actually have a lot of power constraints already? So that is also something.
Where the incremental capacity becomes even more highly valued because there's so little of it to go around.
Definitely.
Yeah, like I'm thinking Ireland,
Netherlands,
yeah, where the data centers are approaching what 10% or more of the energy consumption.
Definitely.
So how do you think about so that's at a geographic level, thinking about it at a company level. Now
It could
zooming
also
in.
become, sorry, but another thing that is also, I mean, increasingly important here in Europe, especially since we had the situation of Russia invading Ukraine now, and we have a war in Europe for quite many years. So resilience is, of course, a big topic here in Europe. And this could also be very is it strong. This supports the energy resilience in the country if you can actually add on existing assets and support local energy grid. So that is also really important.
Yeah, that's come up quite a few times in the last 6 months to a year, talking to people who are in battery storage, energy storage, talking about co-location operators, especially in the Baltics, where they've tried to provide solutions to address chronic power issues throughout Ukraine during the war.
And I think, I don't know how much you talk about it in the US, but I mean, here it's more or less incidents every week in Europe where infrastructure is being under attack. So, of course, we need to stabilize our energy grid and the fiber cables and so on. So, I mean, we have a much stronger focus on that now than we had before.
Yeah, no, totally makes sense. So there's the geography part of the ideal clients, which in many cases is driven by geopolitical issues potentially threatening the core infrastructure. When you think about the individual people that would benefit most from TSO Link, and those where there's a leading indicator that they're not looking for this kind of device, they're not looking for this kind of solution, but they're looking at topics that are real strong connecting the dots, where you're thinking about like a typical journey map, what leads there. Like ESG, the environmental social governance kind of officer, seems like the obvious one, but are there other types of stakeholders who'd be really interested in looking at this kind of approach?
I think there will be. I mean, if we would sit down and really map the whole industry landscape, there would be several key stakeholders for that. But it was quite interesting. I just came from the inauguration of the CTS Nordics group. They opened up their Swedish office here today, and their CEO, Filip, it's a Belgium name, so I hope I pronounced it right. He said, focus on one industry. So I think that is also, because I got the same question when I was presenting T.Loop at Tech Arena here in October from one very prominent and extremely good expert on energy, and say, why don't you just look at all the industries, but I think also it's really important to be your expert, and it's so much easier to be expert on your industry and understand all the problems there and try to solve that. Then perhaps you can find partners that look for other industries, but at least starting with your own industry where you have the most expertise and make it work there and do right. And since the data center industry is growing so rapidly, I think it is so important that we make a solution for this now before it becomes an even bigger problem.
Yeah, for sure. That's always well trodden advice for startups when there's a relatively small product team and there's a relatively small marketing team, is to really, really prioritize where you want to have your beachhead so you can really understand what's going on in their world and build the feature set around that, and the messaging and alignment totally focused on that one particular use case. The only challenge is even within companies, you have data center operators who position themselves more as real estate investment trusts. You have some that position themselves more telecommunications, some that position themselves more as IT services, just purely from going into LinkedIn and doing searches on how these are categorized. So there's a little bit of potentially a split there. And even in different size operators tend to have different ways of organizing different job roles and different teams. And then in addition to the operators, you have all the end user data center sites that don't co-locate.
Absolutely. But I think also, even though I'm fairly new into the data center industry, it is how I've understood it so far. It is, even if you sit on a telco or if you sit on an enterprise or so on, it's the customer or client in that sense for the data centers, they have the same profile, and often they also change in between, and so I think it's in that sense a limited target group to reach out to. And of course, as always with marketing, the most important is to understand who's influencing that group.
Yeah.
Who does everyone else in that group look at and being inspired by? So if you can identify that person or portal or media or whatever it is, and be visual there, then normally it's much easier to create the buzz around it.
The challenge too with all this is that one of the most common questions that I get is, how do we reach the decision maker? And the idea that most of these companies have a single decision maker anymore is kind of, the most part, even if you get them meeting with the perfect person, they're almost always going to be so risk averse that they're going to send it back to their team to do the vetting, to do the evaluation. So you end up with pretty quickly as more of a decision-making committee. And then depending on the company culture, it could actually be people from multiple job functions. The challenge with all of this is it's not as simple as going to someone's about page on their website or going to LinkedIn Sales Navigator, and you're going to get the magic answer on all of this. In a lot of cases, it's different by segment, it's different by company size, it's different by company. And being able to truly understand all the different stakeholders that need to be involved is one of the most challenging parts that throws a lot of account executives a big curveball.
I agree, and especially also that perhaps the one who finalizes the purchase decision is not always the one you need to influence. That is also another thing, because as you said, that person could be also risk averse or sit in a situation where you really frame yourself from any type of influence. But on the other hand, you listen a lot to your internal stakeholders. I mean, I've been sitting in that type of situation number of times where I've been perhaps the expert advisor to the sourcing manager from marketing, for example, and where I really been putting myself in a silent position, saying I don't take any meetings, I don't go to any events, and so on. But I had bigger ears internally then. So I think it's really about also finding out what are the biggest trends, what are everybody talking about, what is the messaging out there, and try also to be relevant. I mean, that is the whole thing also about be marketing. Be explicit, be relevant, be also empathic, because I mean that is something that marketing always need to include. It's think about your brand. That is should be also, it's for human beings.
Yeah, I think that's the part that so many people overlook, is they show up and they just want to talk about their product or talk about their company. But if you can better understand who your primary persona is, who the secondary persona is, and what's going on in their world and their biggest goals and their biggest challenges, and anchor all of your messaging with the idea that it may take 2, 3, 4 steps before they're ready for a product related conversation. But by having this data, having this research, having the content, having the thought leadership, it's many times what's going to get your brand to spread among the different stakeholders, because they're not yet having to endorse your company or your product. They're just saying, hey, I found this great report on sustainability issues or efficiency issues that we should be looking at, that benchmarked or provided best practices for other companies that are in our space.
Yeah, because I mean, all those rational arguments, I mean, they are in the final state where you look into that and make the quality check. But I mean, in the beginning, when you want to learn to know someone, then you're not measuring the shoe size. Then you really is like, do I like this? Do I like what I hear? Does it make sense? Is it a little bit interesting, at least? Then the marketing. So I think sometimes you often see, I mean, we talked about this the last time as well. I've been working a lot in B2B marketing, but I also worked very much in B2C, where you really need to engage with your customer and be emotional connected to build brand loyalty. But that goes equally for B2B. And I think that is important. And for example, when we talked a lot about T.Loop and why it's so important to do heat reuse, I always start with the figure 460 terawatt of hours that we waste every year, which is worth 50 to 100 billion euros wasted every year, equivalent to heating up 37 cities size of Stockholm. So I think just by bringing in the numbers and understand also the magnitude of both the problem, but also the potential in it, because this is something also we often forget. If it's a big problem, there's also a big opportunity for the solution. While if it's is this even a problem? Your product is probably not going to be a success.
Yeah, that's where really getting into the empathy makes such a huge difference, because if you're getting the cold shoulder from a facilities executive or an ESG executive, show up with those stats and for sure the CFO will be on your side, if no one else, and that'll get you the attention of the board members, because wait a second.
And I think increase the scope also in marketing. The
Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.
I think this is what I think is so fun to be in and interesting to be in the data center industry, because as I said, I think I said that last time as well, that I never reflected over the data center industry, even though I've been working with tech my whole entire career. But I mean, data centers it's the infrastructure of digitalization. So it's so important And we often talk about, like, first we had the train, that was the big revolution in the 17th century, and that was driven by coal. And then we had oil, and now we have digitalization, then that is run by electricity. So we need to focus on that as well. So in that sense, energy and data center goes so hand in hand, and it's the new oil industry. So we have to talk about that.
I find too, within a lot of pockets of this industry, that it's almost a very binary have versus have nots when approaching content and thought leadership and educational events. Either they're doing a phenomenal job and they've been at this 10 years or more, or I'm the person that's asking them, like, well, when you get a download, do you send an email right back that asks them, like, who else should be reading this? Or when someone registers for an event, who else should be attending this? You know, it takes a village. There's typically people from these 3, 4, 5 different roles. So with that in mind, who else should be coming with you to our breakfast seminar or attending our webinar? And I get like blank stares, deer in headlights, that I'm like, you realize you've been able to do this in marketing automation software for at least 15, 20 years. And this is the easiest way to get multiple people from the same company downloading your PDF or signing up to attend your event or listening to your webinar. And they're like, I never thought about that. I'm like, well, this is how you meet the rest of the decision committee, or at least people that work with those folks.
And I don't know have you asked how many that attend this pod that actually has put a value on the downloads? So you actually can show also, like, what's the value of what you create also in marketing. I mean, for a download and so on. I mean, it's worth something. So yep. I think that is the same with everything. Put the values on everything and make that part of the history. Also, when you present your stats.
I think in a lot of companies, there's these mini wars going on between whether marketing gets credit or sales development gets credit or sales led gets credit. And on top of that, you have all the stuff with the cookies starting to get blocked more, all the stuff with dark social. And because of that, you've created this environment where you have companies selling artificial intelligence and high performance computing, and they're using a playbook that has really seen its better days, like completely ignoring the stuff that Gartner talks about, where like 80, 90% of the journey is over before sales contact. They're still acting the same way that they did when people met with sales teams when they were halfway through that journey, not when they're almost ready to buy. And it's a very, very big oversight that so many companies are making by overinvesting so much in most cases, either these really expensive programs or really expensive events.
Absolutely. And also find with that, I mean, it's a really good, but let's say you have a CRM system that starts with sales and ends with force. It's quite expensive. And then you really work with your standard flows. I mean, that is the same as well, because then you're repeating what everybody else is doing. So I think it's just what you say. I mean, it's so important to invent your own playbook, try different arenas. This is what I did last year when I started. And now going into the second year, I know so much more about where to put my efforts. And no, that's not worth it. This is where I'm focusing. What type of messaging, and always look on your data. And so I think really invent your own playbook. But I really also want to stress that always be human, fun, emphatic. Put that in, because the worst thing is when you go to these things and you get just a product presentation and it's so boring, you just want to sleep, even though it could be the world's greatest product. But if it's not talking to your heart, and I mean, come on, we are humans.
I think there's a lot of cultural issues that need to be addressed as well, especially among the large data center operators, where they feel that because their enterprise clients have made them sign non-disclosure agreements, that all of a sudden that should give them the directive where they should be censoring, banning nearly everyone in the company from being able to speak in any kind of media or public unless it's completely scripted. So what you end up happening is huge pockets of people that have tremendous amount of expertise that they ought to be sharing on webinars and on podcasts, at least at their company's own. And then all of a sudden you have this very scripted, very limited amount of what they can actually say publicly. It's shocking how many times people have wanted to be guests on this, and they're being put through a ringer as if they're going on like Bloomberg or CNBC or BBC or something like that, where millions of people are watching. Well, it's like, no, it's professional development. It's a couple hundred people will watch it. They'll learn a ton. It'll be a great professional branding tool for them. It'll help drive some opportunities. It is a great recruiting tool as well. But yeah, there's a lot of companies that still haven't figured out that the best positioning that they could possibly do going forward is to take a lot of members of their client-facing team and replace their job titles and their positioning to be seen more like teachers and consultants and trusted advisors and subject matter experts. And that's the reason many are still being forced to compete on price, is because the differentiation is basically non-existent.
And I think that's a danger for the whole industry as well, because if you don't open up and share ideas, then you can't build on each other, and then suddenly I think you can actually improve much better if you share ideas and are very generous in an industry. And I will take an example. I started to work year 2000, and that was when the big .com crash. I had 1 year of fun, and then it went. And 2007, I went back into the tech industry, into the more disruptive industry. And here in Stockholm, of course, the companies were still suffering from the whole crash. And there was this guy who then actually, he was one of the one who founded the very successful company Tokaboka, who did digital apps for children. And he started something called Web Friday. It was super simple. Like every web agency, digital agency in Stockholm, once a month hosted after work, beer and some pizza. And then you needed to share something. You needed to share your best practice. Like, how do you build the grid? How you have sold this code or something like that. Something that everybody could benefit from. So once a month, we shared like the secret sauce recipe, and that developed the whole culture and the digital industry in Sweden immensely rapid. So I think this whole like giving, sharing, making us all better together was one of the things why we became, well, after Silicon Valley, the tech unicorn valley here in Stockholm. So I think it's important to also be generous within the industry.
Yeah, and that's a culture issue for sure, because if you have leadership teams that are making conditions so that nobody trusts anyone internally, then it's really, really hard for them to do a good job of getting the marketplace to trust them.
And I think we've talked about it before, that in the circular economy, it's about creating win-win situations, not just between you and one partner. You can have so many partners and stakeholders and customers, and you can be the supplier or the customer and so on. You have so many different relationships, but it's always, if you go in and really have this, that we should collaborate, we should share the best practice so we can become better together, and we create a win-win situation for all the stakeholders in that. This is when the circular economy business model works at best. And I'm a true believer that is the future.
There's some really good playbooks to lean on also with how people have built out channel partner ecosystems over the years. And still to this day, I think a lot of companies pursue channel partnerships to shift from fixed overhead to variable overhead. And because financially it's a great strategy, but from purely a practical standpoint, there's so many niches that they just would not be able to reach with limited internal resources, even huge internal resources that channel partners can get access to, integrators, managed service providers, that it's really, really a tremendous growth strategy. I think that's a big part of why a lot of the tech giants, the hyperscalers that have survived over the years, is that's a huge part of their moat. I often look at like Microsoft. If you look at their Nokia acquisition and Hewlett Packard, similar kind of, there have been companies that have made some enormous missteps. And it's oftentimes the fact that they have such a loyal army of channel partners that have stuck with them for way, way longer than the average employee tenure, that's been able to give them second, third, fourth chances.
I think you're absolutely true. And just like you say, also those relationships, it's built on trust, and that takes also time to build up.
Yeah. And that's the challenge with all of this, is managing expectations that it's not going to happen overnight. When you hire someone on a sales team and they're working for your company full-time, 40, 50, 60 hours a week, whatever it is, and giving 100% of their focus, that's very different than working with a channel partner who's partnering with 5 or 10 other companies, where you have to earn your way in for them to even consider you. And then there's first lead generation and a nurturing process and educating and building trust before they onboard with your company as a new channel partner. And then just like anything that's based on recurring, whether it's managed services or SaaS or whatever, that's just the new starting line, where they first need to be enabled, trained, motivated to want to go out and sell and service your platform.
No, definitely. But I think it needs to happen. And I think it's important also to find your inspiring cases. I mean, for example, I looked a lot on how healthcare acted during COVID here in Sweden, where you could really see that these really normally strict divided expertise were brought together, and they were sharing, because they were all having the same target. And if things like that is also truly complicated, can be done overnight, that to actually mix like the surgeons with the intense care and so on, and just bring all those type of expertises together. I mean, I believe we can do that also in the data center industry.
And it's going to change the nature of who people should be recruiting for marketing leaderships, chief commercial officer, chief revenue officers, because instead of insisting that you've worked in this industry nonstop for the last 20, 25 years, I've come across quite a few people like yourself where either they were in mission critical and went to go work in SaaS, B2B SaaS for a couple of years and then came back, or they spent their whole career in B2B SaaS and they first came here. If companies want to be disruptive in their space, just looking around at their direct competitors and copycatting what everyone else is doing is not going to give them a unique edge.
Definitely. No, but I also think it's so, I mean, we are in a network society and a network economy as well. So I think that is also a very important aspect of it. If you bring in diversity, we talk a lot about diversity, but it's normally everybody just relate that to either gender or nationality. But I mean, diversity also comes with your expertise. If you come into that, and especially if you work in innovation projects, then it's so crucial that you have a diversity within the teams that can bring different perspectives into that, because otherwise you won't be able to do complex problem solutions. Then you would just see the same solution, all of you in the team. So
I interviewed someone who focuses on innovation for a big power related company a couple months back, and introduced the idea of having these scouts that were out at universities doing research and like being able, and I said, it sounds like a sports scout where someone is like a professional sports team, like a football team or baseball or basketball or something. And they send these scouts out to go watch college games or high school games and find the next generation talent. It's like, I've never really thought about it like that. I was thinking more like a trail scout, someone who goes out on a nature trail and is scouting for what's going on there. But
I think it's really, I think that's really, and here in Stockholm, it started, I don't know if it's 10 years ago or 15 years ago now, but it's actually a cross-functional discipline between the Karolinska Institute, who's the healthcare, the Royal Technology Institute, Stockholm Business School, and so on. So they put together a number of disciplines, meeting in different courses, just to, often they talk about emerging or disruptive or innovation, because then you need to do cross science in that sense. And I think that goes for every industry as well.
Yeah. And I think too, even what got us talking about this initiative with TSO Link talks about why it's so important to have really good collaboration across the full go-to-market team, because product should be uncovering fantastic ideas for content and marketing and messaging. And along the same lines, you're in a great position as well to spot gaps and introduce the rest of the team to entrepreneurial companies that are filling gaps in your own roadmap.
Exactly. So everybody has a part in the success puzzle.
Absolutely. So as we get ready to land the plane on this, what parting advice would you give to someone in a similar kind of role in a very entrepreneurial company that's looking for how to spot these kinds of opportunities that can help open up their company to a completely different business model, additional revenue streams, dramatically increasing the size of their addressable market? What insights have you learned so far?
No, I think T.Loop is really the spot on what Staffan and Matthias and Jonas did, that they were really focusing on the untapped assets. Start there, because if you have something that is unutilized, that also has a value. So that would be one thing. Try to find what more can be, what more is untapped. It's going to be in every industry. And then also try to see how big the problem is. Is it just a feature? Because, I mean, if it's a feature, more or less everybody's going to have it. But if it's a real problem and it's a complex problem, it's probably going to be harder to solve. And it's going to be room for more players, of course. But then at least it's going to be it's going to be enough space for more, and not just that everybody perhaps who already have the existing customers can do it on their own. So I think that the level of complexity, and then just focus now and try to be very futuristic, and so to speak, to say, okay, what will probably AI change? What will be more efficient? What will be the new demand? To really understand, I mean, this is really changing the landscape overall, and try to understand it. And I think Ericsson is a really good example on how they are working with it, because they are always working very close to, and they're doing massive studies on ethnological studies. So they go home and they live with people, and they're just trying to understand, what does behaviors look like today? And if we had this, how would that change? They're still selling the network, but they must understand how the network will transform the societies, and because they need to be able to tell that story to the operators that buy the network solutions. So I think ahead and be able to understand the story and what this really can mean for people.
So it sounds like a lot of it is getting really, really close to your intended audience and having a lot of these conversations to uncover what's going on in their world and connecting the dots, studying it almost like a sociologist or anthropologist would, to truly understand what would motivate this change in behavior.
The customer journey, we've been talking about it so long.
Mm-hmm.
For such a long time, but if we don't truly put interest into it and try to understand it, we don't need to actually identify the customer journeys, because they're not going to lead us. Then it's going to be just a process chart.
And if there's 28 touch points in a typical journey that's going to lead someone to want to invest in TSO Link, what are the 25 or 26 leading indicators that they're a fantastic prospect for this a couple of weeks or a couple of months down the road?
Yeah, I'll keep you posted on the development.
That's the hardest part. So yeah, this has been fantastic, Cecilia. I really appreciate you sharing so generously all the insights that you've learned so far in your time leading marketing and sustainability at T.Loop, and what led you to this new initiative to be able to make an even bigger global impact. If someone wants to reach out to you or learn more about TSO Link, where would you direct them first?
Either LinkedIn, or you find my contacts at tloop.se as well. I'm more than happy to connect.
Awesome. And to learn more about TSO Link, that's
TSOlink.com.
Okay, great. Yeah, we'll include that in the show notes as well. But I've been speaking with Cecilia Hjertzell, who is the Chief Marketing and Sustainability Officer at T.Loop in Stockholm, Sweden. Thanks again for joining me, Cecilia. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.